Minions and Monsters will take Gru's little servants on an adventure set in a completely different era, with new villains and even brand new minions. But do you actually know all the characters that are going to appear in this new Illumination animated movie? One of the biggest new additions in the movie is Goome, the little octopus that the minions end up summoning through a ritual because they're searching for monsters to star in the movie they want to make. The problem is that Goome is way less scary than expected, since the image of him in the book showed a gigantic octopus with countless tentacles. Even so, Goome is going to help the minions free other monsters that are actually terrifying, but it seems like he won't be doing that to help the minions. Instead, he wants the other monsters to spread chaos across the world, which most likely means he'll be the main villain of this movie. His full name, Gary Orcam Oliver Magma Ichabod the Deceiver, makes it very clear that he's not exactly trustworthy. In fact, he's heavily based on Cthulhu, an alien monster that appears in the horror stories written by H.P. Lovecraft, and you'll soon see that the other monsters in this movie also reference classic horror works. And this is just the first of the 16 characters that are going to appear in Minions and Monsters. That's right, another Cinewave is coming for you to enjoy. The Minions have always been represented by 3 characters, Kevin, Stuart, and Bob, who were the main characters of the first 2 Minions movies. However, things are going to be different this time, with the main character now being a minion named James. He's going to be very different from the previous protagonists because, unlike them, James has absolutely no desire to serve an evil master. Instead, his dream is to make his own movies. That's exactly why the story will focus on James trying to create a monster movie. And honestly, that's amazing because it shows that the Minions are way more complex than we ever imagined. Thankfully, the Minions are also going to gain some new allies, and one of the most interesting ones is Dort. We still don't know much about him, but from what we can tell, Dort is an alien robot from outer space who will work alongside the Minions to help them create their monster movie. Some rumors suggest that he originally came from space to conquer Earth, but he'll end up changing his mind after falling in love with someone. His appearance and personality are definitely references to classic sci-fi movies, since many of them were about robots or aliens from other planets invading Earth to take it over. From everything we know so far, the biggest threat in Minions and Monsters will be Irene. Yeah, that name doesn't sound scary at all, but she's a gigantic bubble monster covered in eyes that will be summoned by Goome. According to Goome himself, Irene is powerful enough to spread destruction across the entire planet, which means she could become one of the strongest villains in the entire Despicable Me franchise. Just like the other monsters in this movie, Irene is also a tribute to classic horror. The biggest inspiration for this character is the movie The Blob, which is literally about an evil blob that goes around consuming everything in its path, just like Irene will do throughout the film. Something funny is that Gru from Despicable Me has appeared in every Minions movie so far. Even in the first movie, where the Minions still don't work for Gru yet, he appears as a background character before showing up prominently at the end. So does that mean Gru will also appear in Minions and Monsters? We would absolutely love that, but the answer is no. The reason is that the new movie takes place long before all the other movies in the franchise, specifically during the 1920s. Gru was a child in the 1960s, meaning he hadn't even been born yet during the events of Minions and Monsters, making it practically impossible for him to appear. However, it's very possible that one of Gru's ancestors could show up in the movie, and it would be incredible if he looked almost identical to Gru himself. The title of the movie already makes it clear that a ton of monsters are going to appear, and the ones we mentioned so far are nowhere near all of them. Howard is the name of one of the creatures that will be freed by Goome. He'll also resemble an octopus, but in a very different way from Goome, being much larger and having pink as his main color. He'll be a secondary villain among so many other monsters. In fact, alongside Philip, Howard will take part in the ritual Goome performs to summon Irene. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that he's not exactly a good guy either. Now tell us, which character are you most excited to meet in this movie? Leave a comment below with #monsters along with your answer. We just mentioned Philip, so now let's take the chance to talk about who he is. Just like Howard, Philip was one of the creatures that Goome freed alongside the Minions, who truly believed they were only going to help them make their monster movie. While Howard and Goome are more octopus-like, Philip is more like a giant blue piranha. These 3 monsters are all aquatic creatures, which explains why they're friends. In fact, both Philip and Howard were named as references to H.P. Lovecraft, the same writer who created the monster that inspired Goome. The author's full name is Howard Phillips Lovecraft, so there's no doubt that Minions and Monsters took a lot of inspiration from his stories. So far, we've talked about minions, monsters, and even robots, along with a possible ancestor of Gru, but we also need to talk about Max. He's a movie director who who hired the Minions to star in his films. Max will also direct the monster movie that James came up with. He probably should have warned them that movies like this can use makeup, costumes, and special effects to create villains instead of using real monsters. Even though the story mainly focuses on the movie industry and the battle against creatures that look like they came straight out of a horror film, we'll also see the Minions working for another villain, who in this case is some kind of king. But it doesn't look like that's going to last very long, because the final trailer shows one of the Minions accidentally dropping an axe that ends up decapitating this king. There's a good chance this was King Louis XVI, who was also decapitated in real life during the French Revolution. Yep, once again, the Minions accidentally ended up killing one of their bosses. Seriously, how did Gru manage to survive all these years? Even though it still hasn't been officially confirmed, there's a very high chance that Merlin the Wizard will appear in this movie. In case you don't know him, Merlin is the legendary wizard from the King Arthur myths, and it's completely possible that the movie will reveal the Minions worked for him in the past, especially because they're going to use a spell book to summon Goome, and that book had to come from somewhere. It would make perfect sense if the original owner of the grimoire was Merlin, who left the artifact with the Minions after he passed away, although the Minions themselves were probably responsible for his death. Even if the book didn't belong to Merlin, it still must have belonged to some incredibly powerful wizard who's going to appear in this movie. It's time to talk about the Minions again, because the other main characters besides James are also going to be introduced in this movie, one of them being Henry. We still don't know much about him, but he's a medium-sized minion with 2 blue eyes. As for his personality, it's only a matter of time before we discover it. Another minion we're going to meet is Ed. This one is going to look a lot like Otto, the minion who appeared in Minions 2: The Rise of Gru, except Ed seems to be a little bigger. And if you're wondering why so many new minions are showing up, it's most likely because these minions belong to a different group from the one that isolated itself inside a cave for decades in the first Minions movie, since that original group should still be trapped in the cave during the 1920s and won't leave until the 1960s. Subscribing is quick, easy, and keeps you updated with everything happening here. Let's go? We also have Dick. He'll be the leader of this group of minions, and apparently he's going to get involved in his own adventures while James, Henry, and Ed are on their journey to find real monsters. Maybe Dick will be the one who discovers the robot Dort and turns him into an ally of the minions, since he appears near the robot in one of the trailers. In the middle of all these monsters, we'll even see the mummy here, but one of the trailers already made it clear that things won't end very well for him, since it shows a minion pulling on the mummy's wrapping while thinking it's toilet paper. Yep, it's that complete lack of attention from the minion that causes the creature to be destroyed and lose its life. It's honestly hard to believe when you put it like that, isn't it? It's pretty obvious that Illumination has absolutely no fear of making fun of one of the scariest monsters in fiction. And in case you didn't know or don't remember, the Mummy is the villain of an incredible horror adventure movie franchise that has existed since 1932. Another monster that grabbed a lot of attention in the trailers was the giant pink rabbit that the minions are also going to summon. At first, he seems really cute and even calm, to the point where the minions themselves end up lowering their guard. But everything changes the moment the rabbit reveals his true nature. When that happens, the rabbit turns red, furious, and aggressive, starting to shoot beams of pure destruction from his eyes. That's hilarious for us, but the minions definitely hated that surprise. Still, a lot of people would probably have the courage to pet this rabbit, even knowing he's capable of turning anyone into dust with his laser beams, simply because he's adorable. We've talked about the main minions in this movie, but we can't just pretend they're the only little yellow creatures that are going to show up, because we'll also see the rest of the minions. Like we already mentioned, they'll be led by Dick, and there's a very high chance that this is a different group of minions from the one that stayed isolated for years until the 1960s. We can imagine that this group led by Dick was actually part of the original minion tribe, and eventually split away from the others at some point in history, before ending up in Hollywood and becoming an important part of the movie industry's history. Before you go, take a look at the 2 videos on the screen. Thanks for watching, and see you next time!